and welcome to another episode of Leo's Lessons. Today's lesson is titled, Don't Overthink Your Investments. And I'll start with a quote from the great investor Benjamin Graham. He once said, "The investor's chief problem, and even his worst enemy, is likely to be himself." I was only 3 years removed from being a graduate student, and I'd signed up for my first job as a stockbroker. Eventually, they called us registered reps, and today they call us financial advisors. But to be a registered rep or a financial advisor, you need to have taken and passed the Series 7 General Securities Exam. I was prepared and nervous for the exam. Back then, the exam had to be taken in a big city in a testing center that was proctored. And so the nearest biggest city to me was Portland, Oregon. So I drove there the night before and, of course, stayed at a budget hotel. And for a 6-hour exam, I thought, gee, I better have a full stomach. So I ate the budget hotel food, which didn't make me feel very good. I think combined with nerves and poor food quality, I was sick to my stomach by the time I made it to the exam. Sat down in front of the computer and all I felt was nausea. So pretty soon I was feeling so bad that I thought, well, my mind's not working right. So I'm probably not going to do very well on this exam. It's divided up into 2 sections. It's all multiple choice, all computerized. And halfway through, you get a break to get some fresh air or get some food. I didn't eat. I obviously needed to do something else and did it and felt pretty sick and shaky still when I came back for the second half of the exam. So what was I doing? I was going through the exam and just picking the first multiple choice answer that looked right. So by the time I finished, I don't think I was first out, but I was an hour and a half earlier than the time allotted. And so I felt like, well, I'll just come back and do it again. So the computerized exam gives you your results immediately, whether you like it or not. So I got my results in a piece of paper, and lo and behold, it was a lot higher than I was even doing on the practice exams. So why did that happen? Well, one, I had studied and I'd put in the hours required and done well on the practice exams, like I said. Second, I just was going through and using my knowledge rather than overthinking each answer. Although it was a high score, I never told the guys that I was working with. Most of those guys back then felt that if you scored really high in the Series 7 exam, you weren't going to make it as a broker. That's another story for another time. But what does that mean for what I'm presenting today? So it's our ability to find patterns that marks our intelligence, but does our intelligence backfire? So there's a famous experiment that was done, and it's profiled in this book. This book is written by Mayer Statman. It's basically about behavioral finance. That's his specialty. He was my college professor at Santa Clara University. And in this book, he's got a lot of great examples, but there's a book where he profiles an experiment that's done with 2 test groups. And there's 2 levers, one marked S, one marked B, and each lever dispenses $10 if you pull the right lever. And you get to pull the levers many times. What you do not know is that a pattern is programmed into each lever. For example, the pattern could be that each machine dispenses $10 every second pull or every other pull, regardless of the lever that is pulled. So the test subjects look for patterns by trial and error, trying to find the pattern that dispenses the most money, going back and forth between the levers and trying to find different combinations. Well, as it turns out, lever S is programmed to be very generous, and lever B is programmed to be very stingy. Both levers do dispense $10 randomly, but lever S dispenses $10 in 4 out of every 5 pulls, while lever B dispenses $10 in 1 out of every 5 pulls on average. So the winning strategy, therefore, is to pull lever S every time, because that maximizes your winnings. So there's 2 groups, like I said, Group A and Group B. Group A never finds the winning combination. They keep going back and forth, trying to find the right pattern. Group B finds the winning strategy only after a few trials and sticks to it through the end of the exam or the examination. Group B is made up of pigeons, and in their case, each lever dispenses food. Group A is made up of humans, and the humans try many strategies, switching between lever S and B, often until the game ends. As investors, we do make the same mistakes by regularly timing the market, jumping from stocks to bonds to cash, accumulating less money on average than investors who buy and hold their investments. Why? It's the promise of finding the correct patterns that leads to these errors. Peter Lynch is another famous investor. According to a Dalbar study from 2021 that studied investor behavior, the average equity fund investor underperforms the stock market, as represented by the S&P 500, by nearly 1.5% over the last 20 years. The annualized return during that time was 7.43%. The average equity investor, however, earned less than 6%. That significant performance gap cost investors their financial future. What is behind this gap, and what can investors do to overcome it? First, you have to understand the considerable cost of destructive investment behaviors. We've all heard of buying high and selling low. So look at what investors who try to time the market are up against. According to Morningstar, to beat the S&P 500, you would need to make the right call on the market's direction 2 out of every 3 times. It also means that you would have to make 2 right decisions each time, when to exit and when to get back in. And that's a near impossibility. Morningstar calculates the actual cost of trying to time the market. Based on its data, investors who remained in the stock market between 1997 and 2017, that's 5,217 trading days, generated a compound annual return of 7.2%. If, by trading in and out of the market, you miss the 10 best days, your return goes from 7.2% to only 3.5%. Now, if you miss the 50 best days, you lose 4.5% versus gaining 7.2% by staying invested. The challenge for market timers is that the most significant gains in the market tend to occur when? After the big sell-offs. So the Dalbar study shows that investors who are patient outperform those who aren't. The stock market is going to fluctuate, but your investment objectives shouldn't. Another study found that investors with access to almost instantaneous investment updates underperformed those who had less frequent investment information. That's because investors who ignore the daily, weekly, monthly fluctuations in their accounts are more likely to stay with their strategy and avoid costly behavioral investment mistakes. And they probably have less stress. I hope that was worth your time. Join me again next time for another lesson, and thank you.